Welcome to MFP Live. I'm Donna Ladd, the co-founder and the editor of the Mississippi Free Press. And as usual, Kimberly Griffin, the publisher and the other founder of the Mississippi Free Press, is my co-host tonight. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hello.
And I must say that I am tickled that this is the first show that I have broadcast from another location. I'm sitting near downtown Oxford, Mississippi, where I am for a couple days. But don't tell anybody. Just it's a secret. And so I'm still very happy to be with you guys here tonight. We have a wonderful and really insightful show ahead. I know. Reddy is the CEO and the executive director of the Nollie Jenkins Family Center in Holmes County. She is who I would characterize certainly as Mississippi's foremost expert on school discipline, school to jail pipeline, corporal punishment, and she's an opponent of corporate punishment. She started the Mississippi Coalition to End Corporate Punishment in 2020, and she's an outspoken opponent of the practice today. So Ellen is going to be here talking tonight with us about school discipline and lots of issues surrounding school discipline and how that kind of split into many different directions. So welcome to the show, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Don. It's good to be here. Hi, Kimberly.
So it's wonderful to have you. Yeah, it's just wonderful to have you here. You've been participating. I think now you've participated in two of our anti-violence solution circles, and that's been wonderful. One of it, you talk a lot about corporal punishment, school discipline, kind of grounding us in how relevant that issue is to the issue of violence in our communities. And so we want to get in deep with you about that tonight, Ellen. First, though, as we often do, we want you to tell a little bit about yourself. My understanding is that you moved to Mississippi a while ago from Baltimore, I believe
Yes.
is accurate. And so, just tell us a little bit about your life and how you ended up in Mississippi doing this work.
Okay, great. And again, thank you, Donna, for having me on. It's been great being a part of the community violence solution circles. I hail from, more recently, Baltimore, Maryland. I came here in 1994 at the invitation, actually, of my twin, who said to me, come out and join me in this work. And so I moved to Baltimore in 94. I have two adult sons. I have a set of twins. I'm a twin, and I have twin brothers. And in Baltimore City, I attended school in Baltimore City, and so did my sons. When I came to Baltimore, I came from Omaha, Nebraska, and the boys were really in great schools. But when I arrived in Baltimore, the schools weren't that great. And so I placed both my sons in private schools in Baltimore. And so when I came here to Omaha, to Holmes County, to Holmes County, we started the organization called Nollie Jenkins Family Center. Really, we started as a child care center, offering services to babies for teen parents. And we had an after school program here in Holmes County. And then after really doing this work, we started to notice young people hanging out on the street. We started to ask the question, why are you hanging out on the street and not in school during the day? And so they told us about these training schools. And it was, what's a training school? And so then we kind of started to do our research, and then realized that the training schools oftentimes were where they sent young people who misbehaved in schools. They sent them away from the community to, on the other side of Jackson, to the training school for boys and girls. They sent to another training school. But it was challenging because these children were being removed from schools to this training school. And then when they came back to the community, they weren't able to get into back into the schools in any kind of appropriate way. So then we started to call this movement from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse, because kids were going to the training schools for offenses like talking back, being disobedient, smoking cigarettes. And then we learned that these were really what we call status offenses, offenses that if you were an adult, you would not be arrested for. And so we really started to look at the depth of what we call the school to prison pipeline. And so we recognized that young people were being incarcerated, and it was really being incarcerated. The training schools were really youth prisons. And so then we started to really advocate for young people not to be sent to detention centers and training schools because of status offenses. And so that's really how I came into the work, and really started to push back on school districts and the state to say that we must do better by our children. So that's really kind of my entry into this community organizing work. And all of that came as a result of community organizing, involving young people's voices, lifting up their voices, and involving their parents inside of this work.
Ellen, a couple things there. First of all, define what you mean by status offenses, because not everybody's going to know that.
Okay. Status offenses are, again, as I said, those offenses that a student may misbehave inside of schools, but if you were an adult, you would not be incarcerated. For example, disobedience, talking back to a teacher, skipping school, smoking on campus property. Those are not offenses that a child should be arrested for or sent to the training school for. You really only need the training school basically for two reasons. If you feel the child will not appear in court, and usually the parent will bring the child to the court, and the other reason for sending a child to a detention center or a training school, if the child is in need of supervision. And by that I meant the parent may not be acting in a parental role. There are really only two reasons that children should be removed from communities, and those are the two reasons.
And just oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kimberly.
I wanted you to say a little more about the prison pipeline, because I know that's a word we use a lot, the school to prison pipeline, but we think we understand it, but sometimes we don't. Tell us what you mean when you say that and the definition that you use in your work.
Okay. We really started, school to prison pipeline came later. When we started our work, we call it the prevention of schoolhouse to jailhouse. We said, use language like derailing the train from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse. Because if you're a train, you can derail a train, that caboose, you can stop it and set it back up. But this notion of the school to prison pipeline, really, once children get caught up, and it's a pipeline, think about it as a pipeline, and a pipeline can take on many different branches. So kids get caught up in this pipeline, they go to the training school, and as I said, they come back to the community. But then there's a stigma attached to that child that says, you've been incarcerated, you are a bad person. So the idea that this pipeline can take on these various branches. For example, kid comes back from the training school and go back into the school, it's challenging because everyone knows now I've been incarcerated. So you can imagine that they may be bullying the child. Teachers see the child very different. Even the child sees themselves very different. Because keep in mind, these kids are incarcerated. A lot of bad things can happen to children when they are incarcerated. And that's one of the things that we discovered. Awful things were happening to our children. So we think about this pipeline, those things that can push children from the schoolhouse to the jailhouse. That could be something as simple as a fight on the schoolyard, and a child gets a charge and goes to the youth court. And so that youth court may place that child on probation. For example, a ninth grade student may be placed on probation until they were in 12th grade. Think about that. Probation means that you must attend school every day. In the evening, you go home. You cannot be with your peers. You have to be in the house at a certain time. Those are challenges even for adults. So when we think about children caught up in the school to prison pipeline, that can be quite challenging and daunting for a child, because you really do carry that stigma now for the rest of your school life. So it's very easy if I am an administrator or school official and I come into a crowd and one of the children in that crowd has been sent to the training school immediately, I may put the blame on that child, or that child may take on that responsibility, and it really does not belong to that person. Does that help explain the school to prison
No, that
pipeline?
was very, 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 very helpful. Can you talk about any data that shows when that starts, maybe when young people are most at risk?
Oh, wow. Well, that can start as
I
early
feel like
as
I got you.
kindergarten.
I feel like I got you in your wheelhouse now. You're about to take off.
Yeah. Oh, you see me moving, right? That can
Yeah.
that can that can really start as early as kindergarten. Think about it. I can recall a 5-year-old in Florida that threw a tantrum in the classroom. They put handcuffs on that child and took that child to detention. So that can happen anytime a child is in public school. So, for example, we are now pulling 4-year-olds into schools. Think about a 4-year-old who may throw a tantrum and the teacher responds very different by calling, say, a law enforcement officer, and they arrest that child and take that child, handcuff that child, and take that child from the school. So it can start very early on, and it can start anytime during that child's school life. So it really is a very serious matter, just in terms of, I think, teachers and parents working together, having the tools and skills, because we know 4-year-olds would throw tantrums. Sometimes grown-ups throw tantrums, but
40-year-olds throw tantrums sometimes.
absolutely. There are times I'll throw a tantrum. But so we have to be really mindful of creating inside of schools these safe spaces where children are allowed the appropriate kind of developmental stage that they are going through. As a director of Nollie's, we've always been what we call a no-hit zone. Adults are not allowed to hit children. Children are not allowed to hit each other. We talk, we use words, we talk about our feelings. So we're asking school administrators and educators to create that kind of environment inside the school. It's a lot of work, given all the teachers have to do. There is a lot of work. But if we're really investing in our children, how do we give them the tools and skills that they need early on, so that that 4-year-old who may be throwing a tantrum because the child may not have slept very well, we don't know what's going on with that child, instead of really trying to find out what's happening here. That's really what we're kind of asking school administrators and school officials to do, to really understand where children are coming from and how we can best serve children inside of a supportive background.
And one of the things that occurs to me as you're talking, I'd like for you to say more about who is often targeted. For example, I'm a principal's daughter. If I throw a tantrum in school, they're just gonna call my parents. Because I have advocates, right?
That's right.
And it's not that these young people don't have advocates, but if you have a parent that's working 2 or 3 jobs to keep food on the table, that's a different situation than someone that can leave a different kind of job and come up to the school and figure out what's going on. So I'd like for you to talk about what demographic of young people were you encountering, because I imagine it's a lot of Black and brown folks that are in this pipeline that are still part of this system.
Absolutely. And for the most part in Mississippi, it was Black and brown children, in particular Black children, who were getting caught up in the school to prison pipeline. And it is those children, for example, who may be coming out of poverty, who may have limited social skills to really talk about what's going on, children who may be homeless, and did not have a place to sleep the night before, and you come to school and you have your head down and you're asleep in class. So it is a particular demographics, I think, that's at greater risk. As you said, if I'm a school board member or a teacher, you're not likely to get my child caught up in that, because like you said, you're going to call me and I'll come to the school to take care of that child. No different, for example, than with corporal punishment. Oftentimes, even if a parent says, I do not want my child corporally punished, if you give that child the option, or if you call that parent, because now the child has acted up in school, but you want to corporally punish that child, but the parent disagrees with that, you call the parent, and the parent said, well, I can't come to the school right now. that parent may say, well, go ahead and give them a lick or two and send them back to class. So in many ways, there aren't very many options when young people get caught up in that system, because the school official may say, we had a middle school principal here in Holmes County. His whole thing was take the wood or go to the hood. So what are the options? As a middle school student, you're telling me if I act up, I have the choice of suspension, or I can go home, or I can take the paddle. And oftentimes children are going to take the paddle because parents are not at home to take care of those children. So it really does pose a dilemma oftentimes for children in that situation. So it is Black and brown children who are at greater risk, probably children who come from impoverished conditions, children who may be living in shelters, or children, for example, in our communities, and we all know this, there are certain names in the community that as soon as you hear that name, you're going to say, oh, I know that family, all of them bad. So you've already taken that brush and swiped this child with what you perceive or think about the family without giving that child an opportunity to grow into who that child may be individually.
That's right.
So we know that happens as well.
You know, man, Ellen, there's so much to unpack here. You and I think probably talked about this like 20 years ago, but when right. But because, you were part of the, starting the school to prison pipeline, the organization then, the coalition,
Yes.
and looking at zero tolerance policies and other kinds of school discipline. And you started that in 2003. I
Yes.
moved back in 2001. And what I had been studying, I had been in graduate school, and a deep dive project was the discriminatory effects and impacts of school discipline, particularly zero tolerance policies, right? And so what you were just talking about with race, I feel like that we need to put a fine point on something.
Okay.
And that is that, as I learned in my research, and as the experts would tell me about what they would call the color of discipline, is that things like zero tolerance policies and other kinds of, draconian school discipline would, in fact, be used against white kids. And some of those cases would be very high, the kid brought a butter knife to school or whatever. But the white people back then, and probably still now, would say, well, it's not racist because, white kids get caught up in it. And what the research was doing, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but the research was showing the problem was that it was bad for a lot of different kids, and it was much worse for Black and brown kids. Absolutely. And a lot of that, when you referred earlier to status offenses, a lot of the kids who would get suspended and expelled, the children of color, the Black and brown kids, would get kicked out of the classroom for these very minor status offenses, whereas very often it took a lot more to get a child removed, a white child removed from the classroom. So one of the things I would always say to kind of my colleagues at the journalism school is that, it can be, this bad discipline can be bad for all children, but it doesn't mean that it's like systemically racist, as it is against Black and brown children who were targeted for much more minor offenses because people were more afraid of them, or whatever the case might be. So I would love to get any response you have to that.
Yeah. And part of this is what we call the criminalization, in particular, of Black children, criminalization of Black boys and criminalization of Black girls. So my sons, they were cute when they were 2 and 3 years old, but as Black boys grow up, there's this notion that somehow they look more like adults. People can't distinguish between a Black boy versus a Black young man who may be a teenager or an adult. that has to do with looking at Black children and thinking that they're older and or more experienced. I can recall here in Holmes County, I had the young people out. We were doing environmental justice work, looking at illegal dump sites. An elderly white man in the community pulled a gun on us. And so we took him to court, to justice court. When his attorney questioned all of the young people, excuse me, who was in that van, who happened to live in one of the projects here, he pushed and pushed to force these kids to say they knew what a gun looked like. Just because you live in a project doesn't mean you know what a gun looked like. You know, just because you come from a housing development does not mean that you've been overly exposed to violence. No different than me living in a house on a city street. So oftentimes the very same behavior that is exhibited by a white child, when a Black child exhibits that behavior, it becomes more criminalized. Black girls, for example, one of the things that we do, we suck our teeth. We got attitude. We roll our eyes. Those kinds of behaviors for Black children, and particularly Black girls, are criminalized. With Black boys, Tamir Rice, when we even think about Tamir Rice was a 10-year-old child playing with a toy gun on a playground, yet he was killed because the officer perceived him as an adult with a real gun. A white child could have done that any day of the week and never been arrested. So we really do society looks at Black children very different than they look at white children for the very same behaviors. So that's this whole notion that Black and brown children somehow are criminalized for what's appropriate behavior. Because like I said, a Black girl, a 14-year-old girl rolling her eyes and sucking her teeth, we'll say she has attitude. She doesn't. That's a normal part of development for teenage girls and teenage Black girls. So we really do have to be in tune, I think, to who is this child? Where is this child developmentally? 14-year-old girls, yeah, they're going to roll their eyes. When I was 14, when we were 14, we rolled our eyes when an adult said something to us that we didn't necessarily want to use words to say, but we use an action. We use a nonverbal cue to say, you're really getting on my nerves and you need to back off. But if a child said that, they would be suspended. As a matter of fact, they may even be expelled if a Black child in school said to an administrator, this is not a bad day, you need to get out my face. That child will be suspended. Versus that administrator saying to that child, sounds like you really had a rough morning. Why don't we go someplace and talk about it? Or creating spaces in schools so when kids show up and they've had a bad night, or there's been fighting in the family, there's a domestic violence situation, or just I had a nephew who would have to get his younger brother to Head Start, and then he would come to school, and he talked about, I had to get my brother dressed because his parents worked at night. He had to get his brother dressed, drop him off at Head Start. Then he had to walk to school, and every day when he arrived, they would say, you're late, go to detention. He was doing the best that he could. And so we're sending our best inside of these schools, and all we're saying is work with us, work with parents, work with communities, because this is the best we have. We're not keeping the best in the closet at the house. You have our best. I hope that explained this whole notion of how, in particular, Black children get caught up in the system that is not really ready to accept them for who they are.
Right. And one of our advisory board members, Dr. Carla McCullough, she and her family have the Doty Foundation, which works on the dehumanization of Black and brown children, which is one thing you're talking about. I want to twist that a little bit, because when violence is normalized to you by an authority figure, I want you to talk a little bit about that. When violence is a normal way of, that is what happens, that interaction of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about what that does to children, because if it's okay for someone who is supposed to guide you on the right path to hit you, even outside of your family, but also your family or what does it do for our young people as they encounter the world?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question, Kimberly. Um, this whole notion why we're pushing to end corporal punishment, and that's inside of schools, that's state sanctioned violence. The law says that teachers, administrators have a right to hit children for as a means of punishment. So children learn very early on. We're going to go back to the house now. Children, and believe it or not, children are beat, whipped, spanked, hit with extension cords, all kinds of objects in their homes. Some children, and I don't want to take a brush and swipe all children, but some children are. So they're hit in their homes as early as 2 and 3 years old. So now we've got children coming into the public schools now with trauma that's been perpetrated by family members, oftentimes whoever the disciplinarian is in the home. So now we've got children coming into a school setting. So now there's violence in the home, whether that is verbal abuse or physical violence. Now they come into the schools, and then teachers and administrators then have a right to hit children. So children are developing, their brains respond to that violence. We may not see what's happening, but they're carrying that trauma with them. And so they're anxious, they may be fearful. So they're carrying that with them. They're inside the school setting. And even if the violence isn't perpetrated toward them, but perpetrated toward another class member, can you imagine what that child may be going through? Because oftentimes, whether we're coming from the home or school, there's a relationship that we have suggested between love and violence. I hit you because I love you. I hit you because if I don't do it here, when you get on the street, the police will kill you. It is a way that's deeply, I think, embedded in our culture that somehow we have to beat the spirit out of children. We don't want them to be resistant. We don't want to raise children who have a spirit of challenging you as adults. We don't want to raise children who we want to center as say abolitionists, children who ask questions, children who would challenge adults about what they're teaching, or challenge adults about what they're saying. So there is what we call ACE. It has to do with adverse childhood experiences. So we don't know what children, if we're really not embedded in that community, oftentimes we don't know what children are having to come from, what kind of home like children having to come from. And then they come inside of these schools. I can remember very early on in 2000, I would go in schools in Holmes County and I would hear children crying. I would hear paddles. I would see adults walking around with boards underneath their arm. Even the notion for a child who has been administered corporal punishment at home and inside of schools, can you imagine the fear, the anxiety? So I can't learn because I am so preoccupied with what may happen to me as a result of principals and teachers walking around with paddles. So that's some of the trauma. When we say we want to end corporal punishment, it is non-negotiable. Our children deserve to be centered. They deserve supportive, loving environments. They deserve relationships with teachers where there's a dialogue, where there's a back and forth out of mutual respect. Not because I'm an adult that you should respect me. I should respect you because you're a human being. You deserve dignity and respect. And I think that's all we're saying when we say end corporal punishment in the state of Mississippi. It's time. Even if we just went back to a period of enslavement, that's over 400 years. We passed this violence from generation to generation. And all we're saying now is time to decolonize parenting. It's time to decolonize what we're doing inside these school buildings. It's time to deconstruct, form a different narrative around our children. Our children deserve to be loved. Our children deserve to be happy. Our children deserve to go to a school where you hear laughter and where, community people are in there and principals are caring and we're directing their paths to where they want to go and want to be. So I'll stop there. I hope I've answered your question.
No, you did. You did. Now I want you to pivot a little bit because until I was in the solution circles with you, I guess I have my friends who have kids that are still in school aren't in school districts where they paddle. So I don't even hear, I wasn't quite, tell me what the law is now. What does each school district decide what their policy is? What's the landscape look like for corporal punishment in public schools in Mississippi?
Well, the law in Mississippi is that a child can be paddled inside of the school building. Okay, that's at the state level. When you start to have these discussions at the state level, then it becomes local decisions. Each board then can get to decide what corporal punishment may look like in their own school district. So 82% of school districts in Mississippi continue to allow corporal punishment. In 2019, the law was passed that children with disabilities who are on an IEP, a 504 plan, cannot be administered corporal punishment, but all the other children can be administered corporal punishment. So when you think about it, 82% of the districts, well, how many districts we have here? 152 school districts. 82% of them still administer corporal punishment. And it could look very different in each of those school districts. I remember when we were working here in Holmes County, and it took us a long time to get rid of corporal punishment. We do not have corporal punishment in Holmes County. Early on, we started working on this issue, and the school board would push back. We went through various iterations of the paddle. I think you all can see the paddle. There's a paddle that the school uses over behind my left shoulder. That paddle was about that length. Oftentimes, paddles are wrapped in gray or black tape because the sound effect and the impact when you hit a child with the tape paddle is greater. You're only supposed to hit a child on the rear end, but we all know if you hit me on my rear end, I'm sticking my hand back there. So children can be injured as a result of that. Think about that. An adult, and oftentimes administrators are males. They're very large. So you're talking about a child who may be a 4-year-old as a pre-K student who can be administered corporal punishment by an adult. You're not going to tell me that does not hurt. That hurts, So even the whole notion, I don't want anyone to put a paddle in my hand and tell me to hit a child as an educator. I don't. And now I want to also be clear. We want mental health counselors inside of schools. We want psychologists. We want psychiatrists inside of schools, because not only do they support children, they can support teachers. We are 2 years coming out of a pandemic and not quite out of it yet. Can you imagine the trauma that children have experienced being isolated at home with grandparents that they may have to take care of, with other siblings they may have to take care of, if they're in domestic violence or sexual assault situations? All kinds of awful things happen to children during the pandemic that as adults, we need to be asking those questions. What is going on? What do you need from me? So when we're talking about get rid of corporal punishment, we're just not talking about tearing down a system. We're talking about replacing that system with alternatives, like restorative justice models, peace circles, where you bring young people in who have done harm to each other to talk about how can I mend that harm that I've done to you. We're talking about conflict dispute resolution models, where we're giving young people the tools and skills to resolve their own conflicts. Our children are bright. Our children are intelligent. Those are the kinds of things that they can learn. Just here at Nollie's, we have a Scholars of Peace program where we teach young people how to listen to each other, how to be kind, how to have empathy, how to be a part of the community. What does it mean to be a part of a larger community where you're supporting each other? And that's what we're asking schools to do. It's a different mindset. We're saying to school officials, we need you to do this for our children, because if our children, if they really believe our children are future, this wonderful potential, then let's center children and give them the tools and skills that they need. So on the other side of that, we can say we've done right by our children.
You know, Ellen, when you're talking, it was making me think about being back in high school in Philadelphia, Mississippi in the 70s. And you know, it wasn't that many years after the schools integrated. And I just remember as a high school student kind of coming to this conclusion of what you're saying, that it makes no sense that these adults were beating these children this way. And we had teachers, male teachers usually, and some principals who would make the huge deal out of you know, beating these guys, usually boys, and usually black boys, not always, but beating them in the hallway. And I remember as a, you know, rather precocious high school student going, this doesn't make any sense, because, you know, they could, as you just said, they could seriously injure them. They are adults doing this. And then it's just kind of logical that if you're being dealt, you know, violence is being used to discipline, then it's, you know, it could be not in every case. Some young people are going to respond with violence, right? Because they get caught up in the cycle of violence, just like women who are abused. And, you know, it's like, or people who are abused as children sexually can become abusers because they get caught up in these cycles. So I just want to, you know, I'm just having these memories of hearing these terrible paddlings, you know. And then, but what I really like about what you said there is that you took it to the solution side, you know, that it's not like any of us are saying that kids get no intervention, you know, to help them behave better and to learn, right? And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about some of these kind of wonderful sounding examples that you're giving of, say, peace. I think you call them peace circles, or bringing young people together, because I've been involved in some of those kinds of things, and it can be remarkable to watch what can happen with young people who are considered the perpetual bad kids. So I'd love for you to just, you know, tell us a little bit about what you've seen in that respect.
Okay. One of the things, I have some partners here at this time from Communities for Just Schools. I want to give a shout out to them. We're doing a model called Reclaiming Social Emotional Learning, right? I'm in Holmes County. That can look very different depending on the community where you are. In Holmes County, Nollie does social emotional learning. We're engaging young people inside of the community. Our Scholars of Peace ask young people to, for example, interview their parents. Who are your parents? Where did they come from? What's the history of Holmes County? And then we take them through, for example, what does it mean to be kind? What does it mean to have empathy for someone else when they're going through something? What does it mean to grow up in Holmes County, a county where we've had very proactive civil rights movement, the civil rights movement here. We had Black farmers who own land. The first Black co-op existed in Holmes County. Think about that rich history that we can engage young people inside of schools and inside of their communities. We have to really, you know, there's something called the Sankofa bird. The Sankofa bird looks back in order to move forward. Right now on the screen is a symbol that we use for our Scholars of Peace, and it is two lizards joined together. They basically said, why should we fight when we share the same earth? We share this earth. Whatever happens to my neighbor will impact me. So if I want good things to happen for my neighbor, I'm going to give good things. So we really have to think about how do we reclaim those assets in our communities where it takes us back to learning. I said to my partners early on today, when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of pencils in the house, but guess how I learned to find motor skills? I shelled peas. We were farmers, those kinds of things. Just think about the community that children can build when they're around a number 3 tub and it's full of peas and we're talking and we're laughing and playing with each other. When you send kids out in the community, Donna, you know about this. When you send young people out with media to interview the community, the richness, the history that they bring back to you. Think about young people who have a voice because they're doing interviews and they're hearing this wonderful, wonderful history about their own communities. To me, that's social emotional learning. That brings in a richness and a love for my own community. And so if I love my community, I'm going to build my community, but it has to be a safe place where I can explore those various things that interest me. I can explore growing up with questions. I can explore the relationship I have with my teachers. One of my fondest memories is with my 6th and 7th grade teacher. She loved being outside. I learned to play softball, and she would get out there and play softball with us. The kids don't even go outside for recess anymore. How can you bring up children and not have them explore nature and have them outside learning? I know we got bugs and sex, but all that's a part of the community in which we grow up in. Peace circles where you got young people in a circle and you may have a talking stick and only the person holding the talking stick can talk and everybody else is listening. And you're not just listening with your ears, you're listening with your heart, and you're talking about, and it could be something as simple as, I'll give you an example. I was going through Holmes County, this was maybe a year or so ago, going down Highway 12, going over into Yazoo City to taking my young people to do an interview. And I noticed people were pulling up on the side of the road, and I thought, well, what are you all doing? So I asked somebody, what are you all gathering for? I thought it was a parade because people had out their cameras to take pictures. You know what it was? A group of young Black boys were getting ready to have a gang fight. And instead of the adults going in to say, you're not going to do this, they were taking out their cameras to take pictures. I immediately stopped the truck and I got in the middle of them and I was clear. We will not do this to each other. We won't do this to each other. But you have to have relationships. You have to have deep relationships to work with young people. And so it didn't happen. And I could have been caught up in the midst of it. But out of respect, because I'm a member of this community and I trust young people and I believe young people have the tools and skills that they need. And so that fight didn't happen. And it's never happened. And so we have to pull young people into us. We've got to pull them into us because, Donna, I just reminded you of a lived experience. We all have those lived experiences. When we become adults, we act like, we were perfect human beings. I was a hood rat when I was growing up. I had fun. I ran through my neighborhood. I did things I shouldn't have been doing it. I knew better because my mother and my grandparents taught me better. But my peers are more important to me than my grandparents. At some point, your peers become more important. But children should be allowed to make those mistakes and not have to pay for the rest of their lives. And that's our role as adults, to guide, to help children to understand, maybe you should have thought about that a little different. Here's another way that you could have done that. If you've, in particular when it comes to our elders, because our elders now kind of build up this fear around our young people. And I'm clear with our young people. That's harm. When you've done harm, you need to be able to go back and say, I'm sorry I did that. What do I need to do to make our relationship whole again? And I know that may sound, wishy-washy, but that's who we are. I mean, we're human. We love each other. And those are the kinds of things that we've got to do to heal our community when it comes to violence. And I want to go back, and I did not address, you talked about this whole notion when children or when violence is demonstrated toward children, they become fearful, they can have anxiety, and they can also have anger and rage, because over a period of time, if as an adult you continue to hit me but you say you love me, I'm getting a little confused about what love is. What is it? And we cannot forget the connection. And there is some research out there, but there needs to be more research. Kids who are abused over a period of time grow up to be the abusers in these relationships, whether that's a girl, male, or female. Females can be as violent as males, but we have to look at that relationship. What are we really teaching, particularly male children, about violence and power and control? Because that's about domination and control. Adults hit because they want to dominate children. I'm the adult and you're going to do what I say do. And again, that's a long time in coming. That's a part of our DNA. That's a part of the culture. Children should be seen and not heard. So there is some history we've got to undo to get to where we want to be.
Well, a couple of things there. First of all, to go back to what you said about being a hood rat, I was a hot mess as a kid too, and as a young adult. And I think I mentioned last week kind of being drunk for a lot of 20s, and so I think it's good to admit that we are not perfect individuals. I mean, seriously, for our
I was
kids.
perfect because my mother watches the show until.
Well, I know, right? I know, right? So, Mama, we know Kimberly was perfect.
My mother was not a person in the corporal punishment. I'm still scared of her. So there we go.
Yeah, I know, right? I know. But you said a couple things there that I want to get back to. But one of the things you kind of alluded to youth media, and a lot of people know that I had founded a Mississippi Youth Media Project, which we plan to bring back, part of the Mississippi Free Press. But what I wanted to say there is that we very intentionally invited in kids who needed it the most, along with other kids who had more opportunities for these kinds of things, right? And there was so much there. For one thing, asking, like you're saying, asking kids to interview each other and tell their real stories and be respectful of those stories, even when they involve kids doing things they're not supposed to be doing, and not freaking out about them, is a very powerful thing for those young people and for those of us as adults who are listening to those stories. And putting a camera and other tools in kids' hands is very powerful, so that they can get to know how to use those tools. And the last thing there, I would say, though, and I'd love to kind of hear what you have to say about this, kind of two parts. One is, very often the kids at the highest risk of violence do not get the opportunities for these programs because they're seen as bad kids. And this is that I complain about a lot, including on this program. And we saw that. We saw people who did not want some of the kids that we had invited into the program, some collaborators, didn't want, because they thought they weren't polished enough, or maybe they, whatever the case might have been. And so we fought hard to keep that. In fact, at one point I dumped a collaborator instead of the kids because of this. I just want to say that. So, and so just this idea too, I think you could probably roll this, since we're getting late in the show, but roll this idea, if you will, of kids not getting, the kids who are at the highest risk of violence, not getting opportunities, and then how that cycle, can talk a little bit about how that cycle can play out in worsening violence, that kind of
Absolutely.
thing.
One of the things I advocate for kids across the state, and it saddens me when we send children to the alternative school and or expel them from school, because in essence what you've done is disengage a child from the learning environment, from their peers, for people that care about them. So when a child is suspended or expelled, well, not expelled, because when a child is expelled, they go home. But if a child is suspended, say to the alternative school, They cannot participate in any extracurricular activity. They can't even be on the campus at a game. So in essence, you sent a child into isolation. That child is thinking, I'm really a bad person. Those children who are the most difficult to work with in the communities are oftentimes the ones who do not get the chance, because we perceive them as having attitude. They're not going to work hard. They won't appreciate what we've done. And those are the kids that we really need to be going out, like Tupac said, go to the schoolhouse door and welcome them into the schoolhouse, because those are the children who are at greater risk, that already feel like they don't belong, that there's something wrong with me. They may have very low self-esteem for a lot of reasons, but those are the children who need those opportunities the most. And as adults, we've got to create that space that allows them then to act out sometimes. Kids are going to act out, to allow them to do that. But at the same time, continue to say to them, you belong, you are of value. You know, all children have something to contribute. Take them places. We always take our children on field trips. You will be surprised the number of children who never left Holmes County or the state of Mississippi, even to go over to Alabama. Sometimes I just drive to the state line and cross into Alabama and scream and get in my car and come back. You know, but there are children in our communities who never have those opportunities, who the school district doesn't refer them to the program. You know, their moms or dads may not be able to bring them to our program. That's why you got to offer transportation. Go get the children. You know, so it is those children who are often outside of what, you know, of the values we place on some children. All children should have that kind of value placed on them and be pulled into opportunities like that, whether it's sports, whether it is as part of media, whether it is going to the 2 museums. And I'm so glad they have a Saturday out of the month where it's free, because for families who can't afford, if you got 3 or 4 families, you can't afford to go to 2 museums, but those opportunities are available. But if you don't have a car, you can't take your children to the museum. But for programs like mine, community-based programs and other programs, we offer transportation. You know, it's those children that we're often going to reach for because they need it the most. And you're absolutely right. Those kids keep getting cycled and cycled, and they keep getting pushed away. And over a period of time, anger and rage develops in these children, and they're going to act out. And then when they act out, we're saying, well, you know, I told you it was going to happen, but what did you do to make any kind of systemic change in that environment or how that child sees the world?
Now, we talked a little bit about, you alluded to this earlier, so I'd like some concrete steps.
Okay.
If I, as a parent, don't want my child to be a victim of corporal punishment, what should I do?
Okay.
And if I want, go start there.
Well, we have to end corporal punishment overall. We cannot talk about social emotional learning and still hit children. Okay. We, meaning Nollie Jenkins, the Mississippi Coalition to End Corporal Punishment, we're doing what we call a docuseries. We are documenting family stories across generations. The grandmother, the grandfather, what was discipline like for you? We're asking those kinds of questions. And so we want to show that we pass this from generation to generation. So we're doing a documentary. If people want to be a part of that, if they want to share their stories as adults, if they want to share their stories as students inside of the school building who was administered corporal punishment and or exposed to corporal punishment and or exposed to verbal abuse by teachers and other administrators, or even inside the community. We want to capture those stories. You can contact us at information@NollieJenkinsFamilyCenter.org, or you can go to the Mississippi Coalition. We have a website. Just look up Mississippi Coalition to End Corporal Punishment. We have a form there that you can sign if you're interested in our work. We also have a petition on that page. If you support ending corporal punishment. We ask that you can, the young people do Q codes. You can sign up, and you can sign up to join the coalition to end corporal punishment.
And what can I do as a parent in the school system while it's still legal? Do I go up to the school and say, sign something? What do I do in that case?
Well, if you are a parent and there is still corporal punishment in your school, you can go and you can ask the administration or to give you a letter that indicates you do not want your child to be corporally punished. And so you sign a document and you leave it with the school. But you be mindful that document is in the office, your child is in the classroom. So there needs to be vigilance in terms of if you do not want your child to be corporally punished, you've got to constantly make sure that the administration knows that. You want to work with your school to offer more options. What are other options other than suspension or being corporally punished? What else can a student do in the school instead of those two options? Give students and parents more options as well.
Well, Ellen, this is
Yes.
as expected. This has been a wonderful and informative program, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking to us about these issues. I do want to say, for those who don't know, there are some remarkable people doing work in Holmes County.
Yes.
And a lot of you guys, and there's, like you say, this activism history there. And just, I am just, constantly in awe of what you guys are doing there, and particularly to try to help young people and families. In fact, Asia Wiggins is going to have in our BWC project, our Black Women COVID and Systemic Barriers, it's going to have a series of stories starting soon about Holmes County and healthcare access, and then all of these related issues, including mental health and some of the things that you've talked about. So I really hope that folks look out for those stories. And then you have also been, as I said at the beginning, you and others from Holmes County have been participating in our anti-violence solutions. And the third one is coming up on March 29th. And we really hope that the folks who are watching now or share this program later will come see what these solution circles are all about. We're really building on this beyond policing ways that the community can really get involved in preventing violence and helping our young people who are at the highest risk of violence. And so this is the next one, as you guys can see on the screen. All you have to do is email this mfp.ms/circles, and you sign up for free. You can register. You'll get the link to the solution circles. Very powerful conversations going on there. And I know, and Ellen has really been a big part of that. So we appreciate you for doing that, Ellen, and for being here tonight.
And I appreciate you all, because as when we started these conversations early on, it was a very hostile environment. I was so pleased and honored that there were others who were part of the solution circles the other night, that we shared a mindset. I was so happy about that. So I just want you to know, Donna and Kimberly, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll keep coming back, because we have the answers and we can do this, but it takes all of us to do this. So I do appreciate you all having me on tonight, and I'll see you on March 29th.
And I will say, Ellen, Holmes County folks bring young people to
Yes.
various solution circles. So we urge others to do the same thing, because we really want young people to be at the table, and for us to listen to them and not just the other way around is very, very important.
Because they have answers.
That's right. They do have answers if we will just listen to them. It's not as simplistic as we adults think that the answers are. So I really hope other folks will join us at the solution circles. Another thing that's coming up next week, I'm doing my third writing conversation and this is for members of the MFP VIP Club. Which are donors who give at least $10 a month, or all donors from last year are our charter members. And so I hope that we've been having these wonderful conversations about writing with people from across Mississippi and from across the country. So I hope you either sign up as a member, or if you're already a member, join us. If you're a member, you can get all past recordings to my writing talks, as well as interviews with Stuart Stevens, with Anjanou Ellis, with Angie Thomas. And we have some Rena Everett, which was an amazing Saturday afternoon conversation. A sacred space, as I think a lot of us decided by the end of the show. And so you can get that show too as a member. Randall Pinkston's going to be joining us sometime soon. We got to get scheduled. But it's just been some amazing conversations and kind of brainstorming, really, that's going on in these member conversations. And it's one way to support our journalism at the Mississippi Free Press. You can also just give at mfp.ms/donate, and we're a nonprofit organization. So any dollar helps us grow our journalism. And then the last I wanted to mention is next week's show is going to be another very special show from two fabulous women from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation are going to join us. LeJune Montgomery Tabron is the CEO of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. And then Rhea Williams Bishop is the director of Mississippi and New Orleans programs at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and she's based in Jackson. Many of you know her. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things, but about the kinds of work that the amazing foundation who does support our work. I want to make that clear as well. But the kinds of work that they're doing, particularly for children and families, and what they're doing around that. We'll be talking about their racial healing and truth and reconciliation efforts. They probably have something to say about critical race theory and what's going on there. So you guys, please join us as we talk to LeJune and Rhea next Thursday night. That's going to be another great program. So Ellen, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
This is great. You have the best color wall ever. I just want to tell you that. I'm a purple fanatic, and
there you go.
I know. And Kimberly, thanks as always for being a great host. And I'll see you back in Jackson sometime soon.
All right.
Take
care. Bye now.